Welcome to the fastest stuff in town. Today on Masechtas Yevamot Daf Chaf Hey, we are going to begin on Chaf Hey Amud Aleph, about 15 lines from the top. Tanan Hassam. So we learned over there that Hamoitzias Ishto Mishum Shem Ra. In the event where a man ends up separating from his wife because of a rumor, Lo Yachser. We do not allow her to go back and get married. Mishum Neder, if the reason why he divorced her was because of a neder that she made, also lo yachser. So also she should not go back. So in this, Rashi says, the time of mafarish hasam b'hashleach get, the reasons explained. She'ima to oimer yachser, if we say that he can go back, that she can go back, shematel zu etzel chacham, la'acher shenises, maybe she'll go to a chacham after she got married, v'yatula nidra, and then the neder of the first man will have been removed. V'yomer hamigarish, and this man who divorced her will say, 1 second, if I would have known that there was a way for me to get this neder away from her, well, he's megarish, I would never have divorced her. I love her very much. Therefore, it's like the get that he gave was never a get, which means she was really married. And therefore, if she would be married to a second man, then the children will end up being mamzerim. That's why we tell this first husband originally that you should know that if the reason why you're going to divorce her is because of a neder, you can never remarry her. You're not allowed to ever remarry her. If she's really beloved to you, then try to get her neder removed, so this way you remain married to her. So you can no longer say, oh, I didn't know. So therefore, that's the reason why we say that we will not allow this husband to remarry her. So therefore, once he divorces her, that's it. Fine. So back in the Gemara, so Shalchle Rabba Barhuno Rabba Barav Nachman Yilam Denu Rabbeinu Kanas Mahu Shiaitzi. If he remarried her anyway, even though he wasn't supposed to, do we require her to leave this relationship? So if this husband remarried her, he wasn't allowed to, but he did. So Amalei Tanina. We can derive the proof from our Mishnah. Hanitan al Eishes Ish. In the event that there was this quarrel, there was some form of a rumor about a married woman, and the Beis Din sends her away from this marriage. Says Beferish that you're not allowed to get married, and if they do get married, which they're not supposed to, then yoitzi. Then we say that she has to leave that new marriage. So, 1 second. Midami, how can you compare them? Hasam hoitziyua. Maybe the reason why we're so strict is because the Beis Din themselves removed her from this relationship. Over here, it was just the husband that did it. So maybe in our case, because the husband was the one who initially did the get, so maybe if he would go and marry her, which he wasn't supposed to, but if he did, maybe lo yoitzi. So Rabbi Rav Nachman mastisin nami hoitzia tanan. The truth is, hoitzia is what's mentioned. So therefore, there's really no distinction. So for the Gemara, v'yakati midami is still not comparable. Hacha bal v'hasam boil. In one situation, you're dealing with a husband who wants to remarry her, and the other one is the person who was the boil, the one who was suspect of having committed adultery. So that's certainly more problematic. I'm really sharper dami. Ahadadi hacha amar rabbanan liichnais v'im kanas yaitzi. So it makes sense that the Rabbanan said, in our case of our Mishnah, that if she would marry the adulterer, the boil, then yaitzi. Hachinami amar rabbanan lo yachzer v'im kanas yaitzi. So you should say the same thing in our situation, that if she would get remarried by her husband, then still yaitzi. V'lohi, that's not true. Because after all, as we just said, Hasam over there by the boil, alumi almi lakola. You're strengthening the rumor. Because there's a question that maybe she was intimate with this man, all of a sudden she marries him afterwards. That kind of shows that perhaps that was true. And therefore, because of that, we say Hoitzi. However, hacha, by the case of the Baal, are meaning come be b'kol v'leisei. Maybe this is actually stopping and minimizing the rumor, because the fact that the husband decides to remarry her probably shows that he actually doesn't believe those rumors. And therefore, maybe in that situation, even though he wasn't supposed to, nonetheless, lo itzi. Question 7. Mashnam hamoitzias ish mishum shem rav hechazira shenitan al eshes ish benasa achar shiyatza dezeh yotzev zel lo yotzi. So he says, hichzers ishto, when a person remarries his wife, midachzira, the fact that he remarries her, betuli batli akala, he's basically causing the rumors to go away. Mashen kain hanitan al eshes ish alumi alumi lokol harishon. When the man marries her, then that strengthens that probably that was what was going on over there. And therefore, that's the distinction. Okay, let's see the next Mishnah. So, hamevi get mi benina siyam. If a person brings a get, a shliach, from another country, so the din is, v'oimer, he must say b'fanei nechtam, fanei nechtam, as Rashi over here quotes the famous Gemara in the beginning of Masechtas Gittin, l'fishein b'kin l'shma. Two explanations, Rab and Rub over there. So Rashi brings down, because people aren't experts in the dinim of Lishma, that again has to be written for her sake and his sake, so therefore it has to be b'fanei nechtam and nechtam. Now, it seems like we're relying on this shliach's words, and because we're relying on it, lo yisas ishto, we're not going to allow this shliach to just turn around afterwards and marry this woman, because maybe it's not true and he just wanted to marry her. Then the Gemara says the following cases. Mace, what if the shliach says, I know that your husband is dead, and therefore I want to marry you? Or haragtiv, interestingly enough, he says a very bold statement, I killed him. Or hargunu, actually we killed him. So he's actually saying that he was a murderer. So lo yisas ishto. So the din is that this woman cannot get married. Now this, Rashi says, Hoyo vel adiso he nises, ika lazus vasayim sheme'enav nosen ba v'hed sheker. Aval achar tinase de isha nises biad be'ed echad. So this person, we have great possibility that this person's interest was just to marry her. So therefore he can't marry her. However, what benefit is he going to say this if he can't marry her? So he wouldn't say it. The fact he says it, at least we're going to believe enough that someone else can marry. Rabbi Yehuda, no. Haragtiv lo tinasi ishto. In the case where he says that I killed him, so not only can she not marry that guy, but she can't marry anyone. Why not? Says Rashi. Lafishu meisamatzam Rasha. He made himself into a wicked person. He says, I'm a murderer. So if you say you're a murderer, we know the pasuk says al tashis Rasha aid, that a wicked person cannot be a witness. So therefore, l'chayra, it seems like Rabbi Yehuda makes a lot of sense. So I have to understand the other shita why his aid works at all. And then the Gemara says harag nuhu tinasi ishtai, that if he says that we killed him, tinasi ishto, in that situation he actually allows it. And we're going to explain, well, what's the difference? He's still a Russia. Okay. So taima yam. So the reason why this shliach can't marry her is because he came from another country. Dali kasamchinon, and we're saimech on the shliach because he had to say b'fanei nechtam. If not, it's not a valid get. So therefore, without him, the get would not mean anything. So that's only in that situation. Eretz Yisrael, let's say you're in Eretz Yisrael, in a place where caravans can easily go, there's no fighting, and in Eretz Yisrael, people are bekim and lishma, the level of kasamchinon, because you don't need to say b'fanei nechtam in Eretz Yisrael. So yisas ishto, so l'chayra, he's allowed to marry her because he's not really saying anything. All he's doing is walking in and handing a get, but it's not relying on him. It's the document. So the Gemara says, one second, V'hameis, when he goes up and just says, oh, your husband's dead, that's also not really testifying. The lava lake kasamchinon, we're not relying on there either. Just because a man says that, she's going to do proper investigation to see if in fact this is the case. And only after she's going to get married, for some reason, in that situation, he's not believed enough to be able to marry her. But why not? If the diak of our Mishnah, if you're not being saimich, like living in Eretz Yisrael, and you give a get there, you don't have to say b'fan nechtam, so you're not saimich on the shliach, so apparently he should be able to marry her. The hasam leikaksava. There's an obvious difference. Even though it's true in the case of not saying b'fan nechtam in Eretz Yisrael, so it's true we're not being saimach on you, but not only we're not being saimach on you, we actually have a document which is verifiable that it was written, so it's totally not connected to you. So that's why it works. If you say mace, in that situation, there's no documentation. So that's why you're not allowed to marry her. Titanan, ma bin get lamisa, shaksa moichiach. That the ksav, the document itself, is the proof. Says Rashi, the last line, shaksa moichiach v'lav Allah samchinan kolkach. So because that we're not really being samich on him at all, or so much, that's the reason why he could be married to her. Okay. Now the Gemara explains the other part of the Mishnah. Mace, harag tiv, harag nuhu, lo yisos ishto. So he said, in all these cases, he's not allowed to marry her. If he says, your husband died, I killed him, we killed him. Now, ha nihu lo yisos ishto. Well, it's just saying that he cannot marry her. Ha tinase. However, someone else she can marry, which means that his edus actually stands. Aviyam Rav Yosef, it says, Ploini Ravani Loinsi. So in the case that a person says, this man sodomized me against my will, so hu v'achar mitzdarfen, in that situation, that edus is mitzdaref, because he didn't do it baratzon, so therefore he's not a rasha. However, if he says, Lohargo, where it's signy, he says that Lahargo where it's signy, that it was with my will, with my consent, then Rasha Vatar Amal Tashish Yad Chaim Rashal Yosei Chamos. So we see Beferish that if you are admitting to guilt and you're a Rasha, so you can't be an aid. So how could it be that these people are able to testify and say, oh yeah, I murdered. So okay, fine, you can't marry her, but you shouldn't. It shouldn't mean anything. The Edus should be worthless. Maybe you're right. Normally, we don't listen to such Edus because the guy's a Russia. But because we're dealing with Edus Isha, and we want to be extremely lenient because we want to make sure that if he died, that we don't want her to remain as a guna. We want to do everything in our power, and therefore we find every loophole and leniency to be able to get her to not have to remain in the status of Naguna as we continue Chav Hamid Beis, and therefore we'll even believe this guy who's a Rasha. Now, Gazlin did Divrehen Kashal Edus. Isha Gazlin Divrei Torah Apostle Edus. So we know if a person is a Gazlin Midrabanan, for example, he's engaged, for example, in Mesach Bakuvia, as it says at the end of the first paragraph of Rosh Hashanah, Kol Edus Sheina Isha Ksherula Af Hein Einen Ksherin. So these people are not able to testify. So we learn out from here that a rabbinical Gazlan is Kashal Edus, Kashal Edus Isha. Gazlan de Divrei Torah Apostle Edus Isha. Fine. So what do we see? A distinction between Din D'Orais and Din D'Rabbanan. Fine. So name a Rabbanash and Yemar Rabbi Yehuda. So he must hold like the Shita. So Amalach Rabbanash no Anad Avil Rabbanan. The time the Rabbanan, the reason why the Rabbanan say that we're believing this guy over here, Hacha Kidarava, Yemar Rabba Adam Karv Eitzel Atzmo, that you are considered to be a relative to yourself. The Ein Adam Mesim Atzmo Rasha, and you cannot make yourself into someone wicked. Says Rashi, Hodas Piv Kameh Edem Dami. Hanimili Blumamoina. Of a Kanasal Einish Malkus Lipasel Lo. The only time we say that you're admitting is like 100 witnesses is only when it comes to money. Because if one, you could give your money away anyway. However, to say something bad about yourself, that much you are not believed. So, therefore, this is an element called Palginin Dibura. So he's believed only that this man died, but not that he actually killed him. So too he's believed. So too he's believed that he was Ravani, that he was sodomized. But we don't say we listened to the Baratzon. They did that willingly. We say Palgin and Dibura. Since you cannot testify in yourself, good or bad, so it's just that part is like it didn't exist, like you said nothing, and therefore we say Palgin and Dibura. Okay, so Lema Rav Yosef Diyomer Rabbi Yehuda. So Rav Yosef another Mafil Rabbanan. Mashani Edus Isha. Here Edus Isha is different, as we said. Diakil Rabbanan, because we're lenient. Says Rashi, Afil Russia. Neman will even believe a Russia in order for her to get remarried. That maybe the only time we say this dafka when it comes to the Rabbanas, not the Rices, but nonetheless, again, we see how we're so sensitive and careful to try to avoid issues of the Guna. TB 10. Question 10. Haragtiv, I murdered the guy. So we said, he can't marry her, which is mashma that he can't marry her, but someone else she could marry. So how could she marry someone else? Harashahu upasul edus. How could this guy's now wicked? He's saying he's a murderer. So the Gemara answers as follows. Well, according to Rabbi Yosef, Shani Edus Isha De'akil B'Rabbanan, even though maybe the testimony is acceptable, but we're lenient, or Menashe Mishum De'enad Me'esamatzam Rasha, and Onemun Lifsalatzmo, he's not believed to invalidate himself. Okay. And then the Mishnah said, Haragtiv Haragnuhu Tinase. So Maishna Haragtiv and Maishna Haragnu. How come Rabbi Yehuda makes a distinction between I am the one that killed him versus we all did it collectively? So how come according to Yehuda, when you say I did it, so she can't she can't marry anyone, but when I say Haragnuhu, that she can. So Rabbi Yehuda Ba'omer, it's a case where he says Ani Hayisi im Hargav. It doesn't mean that he actually was among the people that killed. He's just saying that he's like part of the as an eyewitness, if you will, that he was part of the incident, not that he actually did anything actively, but he saw it. V'hasanya. So we learn like this. Amrul Rabbi Yehuda, Mase Belistim Echad. There's a story with this bandit. Shiatzel Hareg Bimigizas Kaputkia. So this guy went out and he was going to cause problems. He was going to kill someone. Imrullah Laeshes Shimoin ben Kayin Ani Haragti es Bala. Why don't you go and tell her that I murdered your husband? Bechnisasi Lulud, and when I entered to Lud, the Amrullah Bechnisasu Lulud Vesiu es Ishto. So the question is, how could he believed? Right? Again, he's a murderer. So how can it be that Vesiu Ishto, that this woman got married? So Mlahen Mishum Raya Ba'omer Ani Hayisi im Hargav. It doesn't mean that he was the killer. He's just saying he was there. I have a holistim katani. It just means shenitvas alade listios, says Rashi. Lafisha haya imahen. It means that he was like grabbed among the bandits because he was just part of it. Doesn't mean that he actually committed any crimes. Avaha yatzil lahari katani says he went out to kill. So beidina de avigachavim deloy daiki v'katle. So it's talking about a beis din that isn't medayik and they kill anyway. So that's the situation where it says that again. This guy said I killed, and they went to Lud, to Lud, and they went to Lud, and then he ended up marrying. She ended up getting married. So again, it's not a raya necessarily, because it just very well could be that he was saying that I didn't do it. I was just in the proximity of where it happened. Next Mishnah. Hachacham she'asar isha b'neder al bala. So a woman made a neder. and it was very disturbing to the husband. So they went to this chacham and said, is it possible you can have her removed? However, says Rashi, V'lo Hefer, he didn't do it. The chacham didn't do it. And because of this, the husband ended up divorcing her. So the din is, Harizel Yisa'ena. This chacham is not allowed to marry her, because perhaps it's shaykh to say that his intention was not to remove the neder, so this way he'll marry her. So therefore, we don't allow it. As Rashi says, Mishum Chshad. Mi'aina, let's say miyun was done, o shecholza, or chalitza was done, bifanav, in front of Beis Din, yisena, memnei shehu Beis Din. In other words, even though it's true, someone part of this Beis Din may have had the intention to want to marry her, doesn't make any difference, because, as Rashi says, the Kamel Chalitza Umiyan Begimel Talasal Chashiti. There's three men there. You can't say that, oh, well, one of those guys, they all plotted to do this, even though it wasn't really a proper miyun, it wasn't a proper chalitza. No, we're not going to say that, because there's three of them. So it's one thing, it would be one person, but like a chacham, but three, no. So says the Gemara, ha hitira yisa'ena. It says that l'chara she was matter to get married. So b'ma'askinan ilem b'chad. If we're talking about, says Rashi, ha hitira v'achach meis bala. Afterwards, her husband died, or girsha, or gets divorced. Yisa'ena, then she's allowed to get remarried. She'ein kan chshad. There's no chshad in that situation. We're not concerned. So if let's say her husband dies or gets divorced, we allow her to get married at that point. So the question is, what's happening? There was only one person that said, one guy. So chad mi matzi mater. Can one chacham really be mater the net of a omer Rabbi Amar Rav Chia Rabbi Rav Amram Tana Hataras Nedar B'Shleisha? It has to be with three people. So there's three. So if that's the case, so there's three people, Michashidi. So then there shouldn't be reason to be chayshid. As we saw in the save of the Mishnah, but the nan mi I know a shechalta b'fanav yisenu b'meishu Beis Din. Once you have a Beis Din, you're not concerned with chashad. So when it comes to the potential hataras nedarim, also there shouldn't be an issue of chashad. For instance, lil b'chad. Really, there was one. Even though it's true, normally you need three people to remove a neder. That's only if you're talking about a Beis Din of Beinanim, if you will. But if it's a Beis Din or an individual who's a mumche, so he's even neman, even b'chad. Okay. TA8. Mi'aina o shecholza b'fanav yisenu imneshu Beis Din. Mahabir mipneshu Beis Din. Okay, we're going to see this. We haven't seen it yet. What does it mean? It's because they are a Beis Din. Bahava mid of a maskana. Okay. Puts in parentheses, Hainu limute mai. What's that come to exclude? Okay, so let's see. So Taima, the Beis Din. The only reason why we say that it's believed and therefore someone among them could marry is because it was a Beis Din. Mashma, habetray lo. If there's only two people, then maybe that wouldn't be enough. So Maishna Mahadetanan Edim Hachasuman al stay Mekach. If you have witnesses that sign on this contract regarding a field, Vyal get Isha, also on a get Isha, which is what we're talking about. Lo chashu chachamim l'davar zeh. So we're not chayshish in anything. Says Rashi, Loimer lo yichu shuv sada zumin lokeach l'chein ha'ed shall get lo yisas Isha. We don't say that one of these two guys shouldn't be allowed to marry her. Now he gufa kamashmon lafuki miman de'omer miyin bifnei shnayim. It's coming to exclude those who say that maybe it can be with two. Kamashmon miyin begimel. So it's coming to tell you that miyin has to be with three. So maybe that's the miyut. So that's what it's coming to tell us. Look at question 8. How I mean a davla Beis Din of a betray will you send the chashidi? Maybe two or chayshid. That's what it's coming to say. Maskana kamashmon demian b'shleisha avol chshad leka afil betray. There's no issue of chshad even if there's only two people It doesn't mean davka based in, but it just comes to explain the din of mian is done with 3 people. Iboilhu kanas mao shiotzi. What's the din again in this situation? If let's say the chacham wasn't supposed to marry her, but he did anyway, do we have her leave the marriage? So Rav Kahana Omer Kanas Moitzi, Rav Ashi Omer Kanas Eina Moitzi. It's machlokas. Tani Lahu Rav Zuti Debi Rav Papi Kediri Omer Kanas Eina Moitzi. He holds like the shita of regarding the chacham that if he marries her, he doesn't have to leave. She doesn't have to leave. Amli Rabban Rav Ashi is that Gemara Svara, is that as Rashi Hai de Amrit Kanas Ein Moitzi, is that based on past tradition, or is it based on your own logical deduction? It's based on a Mishnah. It says as follows. We saw previously. If let's say there was a rumor that this man was having relations with his maidservant, then she ended up becoming freed, or and this gaira that she with a non-Jewish woman, then she converts. It says that they should not get married. And even though they weren't supposed to, but nonetheless, ein moitzi, we're not going to break up that marriage. Alma, what we see as we continue to Chaf Vav and Aleph, Birnana, Mafkinan, Hachanam, Birnana, Mafkinan. When it comes to a rumor, says Rashi, we're not going to say just based on a rumor that means automatically that they have to remove themselves. We don't want them to get married because of the rumor. But if they do it, we're not going to remove themselves of this relationship. Lo dami nitoin al eshasish. This is not comparable to the adulterous man, the hasim, which we said that oitzi, he doesn't have to leave, hoy v'hoitzi abala, because she left her husband, mimnei zeh, v'holach zeh v'nisa, and then all of a sudden she marries this guy, Michor Hadavar. That already looks a little bit too much, and therefore that's the reason why over there we say Yaitzi. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Let's see if there's any more questions. Let's see. Question 8. Adi get. Oh, Hamevi get. Ha'im mutar l'aseh says balas a get. Okay, so this was on Chaf Hamad Aleph. So we said that when it comes to the person who gives the get, so we're saimich completely on the ksav, and therefore because we're saimich completely on the ksav, the din is that he could marry her. Mashain Kain, when it comes to if he says mace, then we don't. So this is how he says it. Edi haget mutarin. Maybe give Medina Sayam aser because of Medina Sayam. Ve'im kanas lo yaitzi. However, if he does marry her, even though we said he shouldn't, but we end up saying lo yaitzi, that he does not have to leave that marriage. Ad kan.